Carnegie Hall, December 9th, 1983. Maria DeLuca was 3 songs into the second set when her voice just stopped. Not cracked, not faded. Stopped. Like something inside her throat had simply decided it was done for the night. Frank Sinatra was standing 6 feet away when it happened. He watched her lower the microphone slowly, watched the color leave her face in stages, watched Tony Ricci slice his hand sideways at the orchestra. The music died mid-phrase. 2,000 people in the most famous concert hall in the world sat in sudden, confused silence, and Frank Sinatra stood there holding a problem he had not faced in 40 years of performing. Maria DeLuca had been singing alongside him for 11 years. She knew his phrasing, his pauses, the exact half-second of breath he took before the final line of, "The best is yet to come." She was not something you replaced on 30 minutes' notice. Charlie Ferraro came out from the wings and got close to Sinatra's ear. "She's done, Frank. Doctor's backstage with her now. Her vocal cords are finished for tonight." Sinatra nodded once. He did not argue with what was already decided. He walked to the center microphone, adjusted the stand a half-inch out of habit, and looked out at 2,000 faces waiting to see how he would handle this. He had a way of standing still that made a room feel like it was paying attention to something important. It was not a performance. It was just how the man was built. "I've got a situation," he said. "Maria can't finish the night. She'll be fine, but she can't sing." He let that sit in the air for a moment. "I've got 12 songs left on my list, and I'm not going to stand up here and give this room half a show. So I'm going to ask something I've never asked in my life." He paused, and when Sinatra paused at a microphone, rooms did not fill the silence. "Is there anyone in this building tonight who can actually sing?" The hall stayed quiet. A few people laughed softly, the kind of laugh that covers uncertainty. Sinatra waited. He had always understood that silence was part of the music, not the absence of it. And then in row 12, someone stood up. Not quickly, not the way a person stands when they're excited or want to be seen. He stood the way you stand when a decision has already been made somewhere inside you, and your body is just catching up to it. A tall figure in a dark jacket, a wide-brimmed fedora pulled low over his face, a surgical mask covering everything below his eyes. In 1983, on an ordinary person, that combination would have read as eccentric. On this particular person, it was the price of admission to an ordinary Friday night. The only way to sit in row 12 of Carnegie Hall without the room turning into something else entirely. Nobody in the audience recognized him. The stage lights were aimed forward, not back into the seats. But Charlie Ferraro was standing at the edge of the wings, and Charlie Ferraro had been in this business long enough to recognize a person by the way they moved before he had a chance to register anything else. He watched the figure rise from row 12, and something in his chest went very still. He did not say anything. He took one step back from the stage stairs and waited. The figure came down the aisle at the same steady pace, hands loose at his sides, not rushing. People in nearby seats craned their necks, but the hat was low and the lighting was wrong. He reached the bottom of the stage stairs and put one hand on the railing. Charlie Ferraro was right there. Their eyes met for a second. Charlie stepped back another half foot and cleared the way, and Michael Jackson climbed the stairs to the Carnegie Hall stage. He had been in this building before, but never like this. Never from row 12. Never with a ticket he'd purchased himself at the box office 2 hours earlier. Cash, no assistant, nobody with him. Just a man who wanted to spend a Friday night listening to Frank Sinatra, because his mother used to play Sinatra records in the kitchen of their house in Gary, Indiana. And those records were the first music he'd ever really paid attention to. Before Motown, before Berry Gordy ever made a phone call, before any of what his life had become. Katherine Jackson played Sinatra and Sam Cooke and Nat King Cole while she moved around that small kitchen, and Michael sat on the floor and listened. And that was where he first understood what a human voice was capable of doing to the air in a room. He had not come tonight to perform. He came to listen. That was the whole plan. But Maria DeLuca's voice had other ideas. Sinatra was still at the center microphone when the figure reached the top of the stairs. Tony Ricci saw him first from the conductor's podium, and his baton arm dropped about 2 inches before his professionalism brought it back. Bill Miller was at the piano with his hands on the keys, and he looked up, and then looked back down, and then looked up again more slowly. Sinatra turned. Two men stood on the Carnegie Hall stage and looked at each other for a moment that had no logical reason for existing. Frank Sinatra was 67 years old. He had been recording since before Michael Jackson's parents had met. He had shared rooms with Bogart and Brando and every serious figure the 20th century had managed to produce. He was not a man who was easily caught off balance. He looked at the figure in the hat and the mask. Then he said quietly, away from the microphone, "You came here to listen." "Yes," Michael said, "and now you're up here." "You asked." Sinatra held his gaze for one more beat. Then he turned back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I believe we found our singer." The audience still had not figured it out. The hat, the mask, the stage distance. They applauded a brave volunteer. They were generous with it, the way a good crowd is when someone takes a real risk. Then Michael took off the hat and then the mask, and the audience made a sound that falls outside the usual categories. It was not quite screaming, not quite applause. It was 2,000 people arriving at the same understanding simultaneously and not knowing what to do with their bodies. Tony Ricci set his baton down on the conductor's stand. Just set it down. Bill Miller repositioned his hands on the piano keys and waited without a word. Michael looked at the row of processing equipment along the back of the stage. The reverb units, the slight pitch correction that rounded out the live sound, the layers of technology that existed between a voice and an audience in a room. He looked at Tony Ricci and said something nobody in the hall could hear. Ricci considered it for a moment, then nodded slowly and spoke to the sound engineer in the wings. One by one, the units went dark. What remained was Bill Miller's piano, two microphones, and whatever came out of two human beings, with nothing between them and 2,000 people. Sinatra watched all of this happen without stopping it. There was something in the way he watched. Not approval exactly, more like the quiet recognition of seeing someone else do something the same way you would have done it. They started with "The best is yet to come." Bill Miller found the opening and settled in, and Sinatra took the first verse because it was his stage and his song, and that was the right order of things. His voice that night was not the clean, high instrument of 1955. It was heavier now, rougher at the edges, shaped by everything that had happened between then and this December night. But that weight was not a flaw. It was the whole point. Then Michael came in on the second verse. The hall had been holding a good concert quiet, the attentive silence of people trying to hear. When Michael's voice came through the microphone with nothing processing it, no reverb, no shaping of any kind, just the raw signal reaching the air in the room, that quiet changed into something different. The kind of quiet that happens when a large group of people all arrive at the same thought and nobody wants to be the one to interrupt it. What they were hearing was not the voice from Thriller. It was not Billie Jean, not Beat It, not any of the recordings that had sold 25 million copies in the past year and made Michael Jackson the biggest commercial fact in popular music. Those recordings had been built in studios over weeks, layered, shaped, perfected through processes that left no accident in the final sound. What the Carnegie Hall audience was hearing now was the thing that existed before any of that. The raw center that all the production had been constructed around. A voice in a room, nothing else. Sinatra glanced sideways at Michael during the bridge of the first song, and something moved across the older man's face that his longtime audiences would have recognized. It was the expression he got when a piece of music was functioning the way it was supposed to. Not satisfaction, something more private than satisfaction. They sang 4 songs together that night. The Best Is Yet to Come, followed by Fly Me to the Moon, then a version of She's Out of My Life that Michael carried alone while Sinatra stood 3 feet back and listened with his hands folded in front of him, not moving. The fourth was My Way, divided verse by verse like 2 people reading aloud from opposite ends of the same letter. After the third song, Sinatra stopped the music and spoke to the room. He had a way of talking to a crowd that felt like a private conversation happening inside a very large space. "This young man," he said, tilting his head slightly toward Michael, "bought a ticket tonight, cash at the box office, sat in row 12, didn't come backstage, didn't call ahead, didn't ask anyone for anything." He paused for a moment. People in this business spend most of their energy trying to get in front of a room. This one just wanted to sit in it. He looked at Michael briefly. That tells you something real about who a person is. Michael said nothing. He was not made for that kind of public moment. The sentiment, the acknowledgement, the ceremony of being praised in front of people. He stood with his hands at his sides and nodded once, and that was all. Backstage after the final song, they walked off the stage and found Sammy Davis Jr. leaning against the corridor wall, with his arms crossed and one eyebrow raised. He had come to surprise Sinatra and had ended up watching the entire second set from the wings. He looked at Michael, then at Frank, then back at Michael. "Did you plan this?" he said. Sinatra said, "No." Sammy said, "Good. The planned ones never look like that." The three of them sat in Sinatra's dressing room for close to an hour. Sinatra had a glass of Jack Daniels. Michael had water. Sammy talked because Sammy always talked, and the room held that particular energy of people who have just shared something they know they will not be able to fully explain later. At some point the talking faded and they just sat there together, and the silence had the same quality as the one that had settled over the hall after the final chord. The kind where enough has already been said, and adding to it would only make it smaller. A decade later, in 1993, Frank Sinatra recorded an album called Duets. He was 77 years old, and his voice had changed again the way voices do over long lives. And the project was built around pairing that voice with singers from the generation that had grown up with his records playing in their homes. Michael Jackson was on that album. When journalists asked Sinatra about working with him, he answered once and did not repeat himself. "He doesn't sing at the music. He sings into it. There's a difference, and most people never figure out what it is." Michael Jackson paid cash for a ticket to hear Frank Sinatra sing on a Friday night in December 1983. He sat in row 12 and listened. When the night asked something from him, he stood up and gave it without a speech, without a ceremony, without any of the usual apparatus that surrounded him. He walked to the stage, took the hat off, and sang. The rest followed from that. It always does.